Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. Now, this is the first book that I'm reviewing as part of a series I just announced called the Easton Press Masterpieces of Science Fiction. I'll leave a link to that video in the description, but basically it's a kind of curated list from Easton Press of 140 books of what they consider to be the masterpieces of science fiction. So I'll be reading through all these books, giving my reviews, and then sometime down in the end of this long journey, I'll probably be ranking them all and doing all that kind of stuff. So first off, let's just talk about the cover. This is a new book. I'll be looking for a better copy to put on my bookshelf that has a better cover than this, but it served its purpose. There was some interesting commentary in this book too. I don't know if it's in the older ones, but we'll get to that towards the end of the video. So let's start off with a little background. This book was written in 1953. He has rewritten the first chapter, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. I read this book in 2006 and I loved it. So I knew I wanted to start this series off with a banger, something that I knew I could recommend to everybody, whether you're an existing science fiction reader, whether you've read it and you just want to reread it again, or if you're new to the genre, this I knew would be a great one for that. So the premise of this book, it's an alien first contact story. And the book is broken up into three parts. And in the first part, you have a near future from 1953, I think maybe towards the end of the century. And these big spaceships just show up over all the major cities on the planet. And there's no contact for like 6 days. These ships are just hovering, massive ships just hovering over these cities, and people are kind of freaking out. And then after 6 days, they get a message, and then they allow one representative of Earth to come up periodically into one of their spaceships to discuss what these aliens kind of have in mind for humanity and the planet. And it's very vague. The first section of the book just really sucks you in and creates this kind of need to know what's going on with these aliens. Now, I'm not going to get into it too much beyond that. It's only a 200-page book, and the rest of the book unfolds everything. It jumps around. You're going to go decades into the future. You're going to see how this whole thing plays out, who these aliens are, what their intentions, what the impact is for humanity. There's themes in this book about, time travel, or not time travel, but the effect of traveling near the speed of light and how that affects a person to age slowly compared to someone on Earth. There's religion concepts come up a lot in this book. Another interesting thing, it's not really a spoiler, but because of these aliens showing up to Earth, it's kind of created this utopia in a way. People just, they're not going to go to war. These aliens are kind of monitoring humanity and making sure they're acting appropriately. But what happens is this like boredom factor. And I don't know how many authors talked about this before. I know it's a more common theme now, but this idea that in a utopia, what's the point of living? What are we reaching for? So he addresses that in a really interesting way. I really appreciated that. So I'm not going to go much into the plot more than that. I'll get into who should read this. I think everyone should read this. But first we'll go through some pros and cons. The pros for this book, I think for 200 pages, there's a lot of information packed in here. You think when you read through this first section, there's a reveal at the end, or there's a reveal at the beginning of the second section that reveals kind of what was going on in the first. And you're like, wow. And then it steps it up beyond that. And then the third section of the book just takes it to a whole nother level. So for a 200-page book to go over that much, it's pretty amazing. I think another pro, the first section of this book reads so well. Maybe some of the themes are a little dated, but his writing style, he just has this perfect way of describing things just enough to leave it vague, because I think Arthur C. Clarke could kind of see what was the way we were going with technology and some of these ideas and science, but he left it vague enough to where it just reads like a current book. It's really amazing. After that, the writing gets a little bit more dated when we get into some of the scenes and things that are going on, but it doesn't distract from the book at all. The thought-provoking aspect is probably the biggest pro. Once you get to the end of this book, you'll be thinking about it for a while, I'm pretty sure. For cons, in a book like this, in this era, there wasn't a lot of time spent on character development, and the alien development was good. I really liked that aspect of the book, but when you get into the characters, you are jumping away from characters and going decades in the future and stuff too. So he didn't spend a lot of time on that. Now, if you're a fan of science fiction and you haven't read this book yet, put it on your list. It's just an amazing read. It kind of set the stage for a lot of future authors and themes that are in science fiction. And it's a must read, in my opinion. I think this definitely deserves to be considered a masterpiece of science fiction. If you are new to science fiction and you want to get into it, I think you will have no problem with this book. Towards the end of it, get ready for your brain to expand a little bit, and hopefully you enjoy that experience and it'll make you want to read some more. But I think it's very approachable, especially if you read this first section, and I think it's only like 60 pages or something. Yeah, if you get 55 pages in and you're not hooked on this book, then maybe science fiction isn't for you, or maybe you could start with something else first. But I think that this is a great one to start with. I kind of decided I don't really want to do like a score or anything. On Goodreads, I'll be giving this a 5-star. It was already a 5-star, but I don't really want to harp on scores too much. Now, a couple interesting things that I mentioned earlier. So one, he has written 2 versions, as far as I can tell, only 2, of the first chapter. And I think he's replaced that a couple times. And I know people have said he rewrote the book. He says right in here, the only thing like from chapter 2 onwards, childhood ends remains exactly the same as it was written in 1953. And the only reason he rewrote those first 2 chapters had to do with he had the Germans leading the space race, and then he had the Russians leading the space race, and he flip-flopped back and forth how he decided he wanted to do that. The other really interesting thing is on the copyright page, there's this little blurb here. Hopefully you can see that. It says, "The opinions expressed in this book are not those of the author." And it's a really interesting thing there, but he writes this prologue explaining that. And one of the other themes in this book is that mankind does not have a place in the stars or outside of the planet Earth. And I guess he had written some other things that contradicted that idea. And so he very nicely explains that this is a work of fiction. It's kind of going down this thought experiment, and he talks about how he got the idea of this book. So it was really insightful and interesting. And I don't think I've ever seen a blurb like that on the first page. But other than that, great book. one of the best. My favorite of Arthur C. Clarke, I've read 2001, and I've read Rendezvous with Rama, and this is my favorite. A reread was just as good as I remember reading it the first time. So great stuff there. So next I'm going to be reading Dragon's Egg. If I love it, there is a sequel, I might read that next. That's not part of the Masterpieces of Science Fiction series, but I think the next Masterpieces of Science Fiction book that I'm going to read is Greg Bear, Blood Music. So be on the lookout for those. And thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you on the next one.